Nobody expected the pattern to be this strong. Not because football is predictable, not because the best teams always win, and certainly not because the World Cup has ever been a competition that follows logic. Quite the opposite. The World Cup is built on chaos. It's built on moments nobody sees coming. A missed penalty, a red card, a deflection, a single mistake that changes history. And yet, hidden beneath all that chaos, there is a pattern. A pattern so strange that many football fans don't even realize it exists. A pattern that has quietly followed the World Cup for decades, destroying some of the strongest teams on Earth, some of the most talented squads ever assembled, some of the biggest favorites the tournament has ever seen. And the strangest part, most people still don't believe it. Because every 4 years, the same thing happens. The hype returns, the predictions begin, the experts make their picks, and once again, millions of fans convince themselves that this time will be different. But history keeps telling a different story. A story that starts long before kickoff. A story that begins the moment a team becomes the favorite. Because there may be no position in world football more dangerous than being expected to win the World Cup. Not the underdog, not the dark horse, not the defending champion, the favorite. For years, football fans have treated favoritism as an advantage. The strongest squad, the deepest roster, the best players, the shortest betting odds. What could possibly go wrong? Quite a lot, as it turns out. Because when we looked back at every World Cup from 1998 onward, something fascinating appeared. The teams expected to dominate rarely dominated. The teams expected to control the tournament rarely controlled it. And the teams carrying the weight of expectation often collapsed under it. Not occasionally, repeatedly, again and again and again, which raises an uncomfortable question. What if being the favorite isn't an advantage at all? What if it's a curse? Before we answer that, we need to understand what it actually means to be a World Cup favorite. Because not every strong team enters the tournament carrying the same burden. Some teams arrive with hope, others arrive with expectation. The difference matters a lot. Hope allows failure. Expectation does not. Hope says, maybe we can win. Expectation says, we should win. And once a nation reaches that second category, everything changes. Every draw becomes a crisis. Every poor performance becomes a scandal. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every opponent becomes dangerous. Because suddenly, winning isn't enough. You have to justify the belief. And that belief can become incredibly heavy. Take France in 2002. 4 years earlier, they had lifted the World Cup. They were the reigning champions, the reigning European champions. They had Zinedine Zidane, Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, one of the most talented squads ever assembled. Many believed they were unstoppable. Some believed they could become one of the greatest international teams in football history. Then the tournament began, and something extraordinary happened. They didn't score a single goal, not one. 3 matches, 0 goals, eliminated in the group stage. One of the most shocking collapses the World Cup has ever seen. At the time, many treated it as a unique disaster, a freak event, something that would never happen again. But history had other plans, because 4 years later, another favorite arrived, Brazil, 2006. A team so talented that people still talk about it today. Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Kaká, Adriano, Robinho. Some journalists called them unbeatable before the tournament even started. Some supporters were already discussing the final before the group stage had begun. The expectation wasn't simply that Brazil would compete. The expectation was that they would dominate. Then reality arrived. Quarter-final exit, no trophy, no dynasty, no immortality. Just another favorite discovering that the World Cup doesn't care what people expect. And yet, something remarkable happened afterward. Nobody learned anything. The pattern continued. The belief returned. Because football fans don't remember probabilities. They remember stories, and stories are powerful. Much more powerful than statistics. Much more powerful than history. Much more powerful than evidence. Every 4 years, a new story appears. A new generation, a new superstar, a new reason to believe. And every 4 years, millions of people convince themselves that this version will be different from all the versions that came before it. That's where the curse begins. Not on the pitch, in the mind. Because once expectation becomes strong enough, reality starts becoming secondary. Football stops being about what is likely and starts becoming about what feels inevitable. That distinction changes everything. Now here's where things become even more interesting. Because not all favorites fail in the same way. Some collapse immediately. Others survive long enough to make their failure even more painful. Think about Spain in 2014, the reigning world champions. The team that had dominated international football. The team many considered one of the greatest ever. Then came the Netherlands. 5 goals. One of the most famous defeats in World Cup history. A result so shocking that people still remember exactly where they were when it happened. Again, expectation met reality. Again, reality won. And still, the pattern continued. Because the curse isn't about one team. It's about a role. The role of favorite. And whoever inherits that role inherits the pressure that comes with it. That pressure grows every year, every article, every television debate, every prediction, every ranking, every betting market, every social media discussion. Together they create a mountain the favorite must carry before the tournament even begins. And sometimes that mountain becomes impossible to climb. Now at this point you might be thinking, hold on, favorites do win World Cups, and that's true, they absolutely do. Brazil won as favorites, Spain won as favorites. Argentina entered 2022 as one of the strongest teams in the world. So how can there be a curse? The answer lies in something much more subtle. Because the curse isn't that favorites never win. The curse is that they fail far more often than people think. Much more often. And when we reach the modern era, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Because the tournament that may explain the entire curse better than any other is 2018. France eventually won. But before the tournament started, they weren't the primary favorite. Germany was. Germany arrived carrying enormous confidence. The defending champions, a squad filled with elite talent. A team that had reached at least the semifinals in 4 consecutive World Cups. Everything pointed in one direction. And then they finished bottom of their group. Bottom. Not quarterfinals, not round of 16, bottom. For one of the greatest football nations on earth, it was almost unthinkable. But the curse doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't care about history. It doesn't care about trophies. It only cares about expectation. And Germany entered that tournament carrying more expectation than almost anyone. Then came 2022, another favorite, another story, another lesson. Because this time the weight fell on Brazil. And what made Brazil fascinating wasn't their talent. Everyone knew they had talent. It wasn't their depth. Everyone knew they had depth. It was the certainty surrounding them, the confidence, the feeling that this was finally their moment. For months before the tournament, countless analysts described Brazil as the most complete team in the competition, balanced, experienced, dangerous, ready. And then Croatia happened. Once again, expectation met reality. Once again, reality won. But here's the strangest part of all. Even after seeing this happen over and over again, fans continue to trust favorites, not because they're irrational, because they're human. And that's where this story becomes much bigger than football, because what we're really looking at isn't a football curse, it's a psychological one. Humans are naturally attracted to certainty. We want answers, we want confidence, we want to believe that the strongest team will eventually prove itself. We want football to make sense. The World Cup refuses to cooperate, and that is exactly why we love it. But if the World Cup favorite curse is real, we still haven't answered the most important question: why? Why do some of the strongest teams in football repeatedly struggle to meet the expectations placed upon them? The answer begins with a simple reality. Winning a World Cup is incredibly difficult. Much more difficult than people realize. A club season lasts months. The best teams usually rise to the top. A World Cup lasts a few weeks. One bad game can erase 4 years of preparation. One injury can change an entire tournament. One penalty shootout can rewrite history. And favorites face an additional problem. Everyone prepares for them. The strongest teams don't arrive unnoticed. Their opponents study them, analyze them, plan for them. The favorite becomes the target. Every underdog wants to create the upset. Every nation wants to become the headline. And suddenly, every match feels like a final. That's the first layer of the curse. The second layer is even more dangerous. Expectation changes behavior, not just among fans, among players, managers, entire countries. When a nation enters a tournament expecting victory, pressure becomes unavoidable. Every poor performance becomes a crisis. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every tactical decision becomes a debate. And the deeper a team goes, the heavier that pressure becomes. Because the closer they get to success, the more afraid they become of failure. Football history is full of talented teams that played freely until expectations arrived. Then suddenly everything became harder. Passes became safer. Movements became slower. risk disappeared. The desire to avoid mistakes became stronger than the desire to create greatness. And that's often where favorites begin to unravel, not because they lack quality, because they become prisoners of expectation. Now here's the fascinating part. The teams that eventually surprise the world often experience the opposite. Think about Croatia in 2018. Almost nobody expected them to reach the final, which gave them freedom. They weren't carrying the same burden as Germany, or Brazil, or Spain. They were allowed to exceed expectations. The favorites weren't, because favorites aren't allowed to surprise anyone. They're expected to deliver, every single time. Now let's look at something even stranger. If favorites fail so often, why do people keep believing in them? The answer reveals something profound about football itself. Football fans don't just support teams, they invest in stories. Every tournament begins with a familiar question: maybe now, maybe this squad, maybe this generation, maybe this coach, maybe this tournament. Those questions are powerful because they appeal to hope, and hope is stronger than evidence. It allows us to believe the next chapter will be different from the last one. Sometimes it is, most of the time it isn't. And that's exactly why the World Cup favorite curse survives. Because every tournament creates a new reason to believe, a new reason for expectations to grow, a new opportunity for reality to intervene. Now let's be clear. This doesn't mean favorites are doomed. It doesn't mean the best squad cannot win. What it means is something much more interesting. Football is resistant to certainty. The World Cup is not designed to reward confidence. It is designed to test it. Every tournament begins with predictions. Every tournament ends with surprises. And somewhere between those two moments, reality reveals itself. Which brings us back to the question we started with. Is the World Cup favorite curse real? The answer depends on how you define a curse. If by curse you mean a supernatural force that punishes strong teams, then no, of course not. But if you define a curse as a pattern that people recognize yet continue to underestimate, then the answer becomes much more difficult. Because the evidence is everywhere. France in 2002, Brazil in 2006, Spain in 2014, Germany in 2018, Brazil in 2022. Different teams, different generations, the same lesson. The World Cup does not reward certainty, it punishes it. Every 4 years, football creates a favorite. Every 4 years, the tournament asks the same question. Are they really as good as everyone thinks? Sometimes the answer is yes. More often than people realize, it isn't. And somewhere on the road to 2026, another favorite is already being crowned. Another nation is already carrying the weight of expectation. History suggests that should worry them. Because the most dangerous place in world football isn't being the underdog. It's being the team everyone expects to win. The question is, who is carrying that curse now? And can we see it before the anthem begins?